This shir is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmosoi of Chaim Yesocha ben Yechiel Zaydel Dov, Chaim Feigenbaum, our unforgettable friend. Shiel Le'ilui Nishmosoi. This week we read Parshas Mishpatim, and we will be discussing one of the most central, complex, sugyas, issues in Choshen Mishpat, in Toras HaMishpat, and that is Yesod Dinei Shomrim. Hilchas Pikodoin. When a person takes upon himself the responsibility to look after an object or money or possession of a fellow Jew, that he is defined as a shomer. Daled shomrim hem, shomer chinam, shomer socha, socha, shoyel. Shomer chinam is a person that takes upon himself to look after his fellows' money or possessions without receiving any payment. No payment, no compensation. Shomer socha is paid for his services. As soichet is a person that rents an animal, a tool, an appliance, anything, a car, a truck. And a shoyel is a person that borrows from his fellow Jew, not money. If it would be money, it would be defined as a loiva shaila. He borrowed a tool, an appliance, an animal, a car, or anything similar. Those are daled shoymim. Shoymechinim chayev b'pshiyah. He bears responsibility only for damages incurred by negligence. Shoymesocha chayev b'gneva v'aveda. Even if he wasn't grossly negligent, if it was stolen or just lost, he bears liability. Shoyel es chayev afilo ba'onsin. Even though the chayfetz he took upon himself to look after was lost, damaged, destroyed, totally by circumstances that were beyond his control, nevertheless he bears responsibility. Those are the basic halachas of Shomrim. But the question we will try to deal with and come to grips with is, what is the basis, the basic understanding, the rationale of Dinei Shomrim? A general overview on chiyuvei tashlumin shebetoira. I think all the different forms, shapes, and types of compensation that we find in Torah fit into one of three categories. Category number one, dinei nezikin. When a person causes loss or damage to the possessions of a fellow person, shelo b'reshus, out of negligence or intent, then he is chayev b'tashlumin. He is responsible for those losses and damages, and it is upon him to compensate the person who incurred those losses. This category includes dinei gneva v'gzela, choyvel u'mazik, oynes u'mefata, and the like. Category number two, when you benefit from another person, you have to pay for that benefit. As they say in America, no free lunch. If you expect to benefit and receive, then you have to pay. This basic principle includes mekach u'memkar, priyas choiv, nene u'mishtar shelei. Some of you might be familiar with these basic concepts. Category number three would be kinyan and hischayvus. A person could take upon himself monetary obligations. B'darkei kinyonim. Were you ever present when a tnoyim was written or a ksubin? So you probably noticed that the chosin is makabel kinyan by lifting a handkerchief or any other beged 3 tfachim. The same is done by a tnoyim, but by a tnoyim it is not the chosin that does the kinyan, but rather both arevim kablonim, both mechutanim. By kinyan siddur, a person could obligate himself, monetary obligations. And this form of compensation is based on consent, mutual consent. These are the three basic categories, and all dinei tashlum shebetoira fit into one of these three. where do we place Dinei Shomrim? We could define the basic rationale of Chiyuv Shomrim in each of these three different formulations. A Shomer took upon himself to look after his friend's possessions. So if he is negligent and he does not fulfill his obligation, he might be considered as if he was the one that caused, directly or indirectly, to the losses and to the damage. That would be one interpretation of Dinei Shomrim. However, this is reasonable regarding Shomer Chunim Shechayev B'Pshiyah, Shomer Socher Shechayev B'Gneva V'Aveda. How would we explain the Chiyuv of Shoyel Shechayev Ba'Oinsen? It would be impossible to say that he caused damages by negligence, because the oinus is the opposite of negligence. On the other hand, we could explain the Chiyuv of a Shoyel and a Socher based on Nehene, because a Shoyel and a Socher derive benefit from the object that is in their possession, their friend's object. A Shoyel is defined by Chazal Kolanu Shaloi. He is the only one that is benefiting from this deal. He's not paying. Socher is Hanoah Lazeh Lazeh. But the common denominator between the two is a person has usage. He is using his fellows' tools, animals, whatever it is, for his own benefit. And therefore he is obligated to bear responsibility for the losses. Shomer Chinam has no benefit. He is doing chesed. He's doing a favor. So approach number one would cover Shomer Chinam, Shomer Socher, Socher. It would not cover Shoyel. Approach number two would cover Shoyel, Socher, maybe Shomer Socher. It would not cover Shomer Chinam. Would it be reasonable to say and argue that there is a fundamental difference, two different Gedolim regarding Shomer Chinam and Shoyel? Maybe, but I think it would be more reasonable to assume that the difference between one Shomer and the other is only in the degree of their liability, not in the essentials, not in the basic Hagdolah. Therefore, my feeling would be that the entire realm of Dinei Shomrim fits into category number 3. When a Shomer takes upon himself responsibility, what he obligated himself to is not only to look after his friend's things, but also taking upon himself, willingly doing so, intentionally doing so, taking upon himself also to bear responsibility for monetary compensation. And that is part of the deal. It's somewhat of a package deal. And the Shomer willfully takes upon himself, one, to look after his friend's possessions, and number 2, to compensate if those belongings or possessions or whatever it is are lost, are damaged, while he is responsible for their safeguarding. That would be my basic feeling, a basic approach, how to define the fundamental chiyuv of Dinei Shomrim. There's a Gemara of Metziat Tzadik Daled Lamed Aleph. The Gemara says, Masna Shomer Chinam is poter mishvur. Shomer Socher could make a stipulation he should be poter of Gneva Veda, and even a Shoyel could stipulate that he does not want to bear responsibility for oinus. The Gemara asks, why wouldn't that be considered a Masna Mashakosa B'Torah Shitnui Botel? We have a very basic rule, many places in Shas. Masna al Masha Kosev B'Torah Tnoi Botel. A person cannot stipulate against the Torah's decrees. If a person is Mekadesh Isha, he marries his wife and he stipulates Al Manashe Ein Lach Ulai She'er Ksus V'Oine Tnoi Botel. That stipulation is invalid. So why would this not be considered a Masna Kosev B'Torah when a Shomer is not willing to take upon himself the degree of liability that the Torah demands from him? The Gemara asks, would this halacha be dependent on the machlokes of Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? Haim b'dover shebemomein tnoi kayim or tnoi batel? And the Gemara says no. Even according to the Meir, dover shebemomein tnoi batel, Shomrim is different. The meikora lo shia beid nafshei. He initially did not obligate himself, and therefore he bears no obligation. Toises in Ksubas Nuvav Amid Beis asks, why would that be different than Kedushin? Al menashe en l'chalai sheik says, v'oinami kora lo shia beid nafshei. Toises seems to suggest two different approaches, two different ways to solve this obvious contradiction. One is, Dinei Shomrim is different because we see that HaTorah Ribis or Shomrim Rabim. We see there are different types and different degrees of liability. And therefore a person could choose his own priorities. Seems to be strange. Anybody could choose their own halachas? Why? The other teretz and tesis is bearing in mind and realizing that the greater the benefit the person has, the greater the liability and responsibility he bears. This obviously proves that the fundamental geder of chiyuvei shomrim is not exeres akosa, but rather because this is what the shomer takes upon himself. Understanding, knowing that a person is responsible for his word, his promise, and the greater the benefit he is entitled to, the greater the responsibility he is willing to take upon himself. And therefore, this chiyuv is different than other chiyuv mammon. This chiyuv is based on consent. And therefore, mikol lo shia beid nafshei, if there is no consent, there is no liability. Tosfos Harosh, on the spot, Ksubas Nuvav Amid Aleph, and once again, above Metziat Tzadik Daled Amid Aleph. And Tosfos Harosh is usually the most significant and important source of finding the proper interpretation and understanding in Tosfos. They usually go along the same lines and the same logic. Tosfos Harosh makes it clear that there are not two different tirutzim, but two different points to emphasize. But actually both are one, two sides of the same coin. And the formulation we find in Tosfos Harosh is this. Because we see there are different levels in Dinei Shomrim, various different levels of responsibility, and we realize that they're not arbitrary, but rather extremely logical. And the more the benefit, the greater the benefit and entitlement, the greater the responsibility, the liability. And therefore, we assume that the basic rationale of Shomrim is his chayvus. The person obligates himself, and therefore, it depends entirely on his consent. And he is entitled to stipulate Mikora lo shiabed nafshei. K'tzayis achoishin twice. Reish Tzadik Aleph, once again Shin Mem. Machne Ephraim, first chapter, Perek Aleph of Hilchos Shomrim. Their interpretation of Tosfos is, and they actually use the coming formulation: Yordo Torah l'sov datei shel adam. The Torah teaches us what the person is willing to take upon himself. As if the Torah prophesies and just determines what the person is willing to take upon himself. However, my understanding would be slightly different. The basic rationale of chiyuvei shomrim is consent. But it is not that consent actually generates the chiyuv. Because to me it is clear that if a person borrowed a tool from his neighbor, a car or anything else, being totally ignorant of Dinei Shomrim and totally unaware that he took upon himself responsibility, nevertheless he is responsible because that is the Din Torah. Shoyal Chayev Ba'oinsin. So, the Chiyuv Tashlumim definitely is exercised because of a Din Torah. Our question, our discussion is only, what is the basis of this Din, of this Chiyuv? Which of the three categories does it fit into? But just like it is clear as daylight, if Dinei Shomrim is based on Dinei Nezikin, it is not because Shomer Sheposha is considered a mazik. Definitely isn't more than Groma ben Nezikin. It is less than Groma ben Nezikin because he is totally passive. Groma ben Nezikin causes damage or loss by his actions, however indirectly. But Shomrim is totally passive. And he caused loss or damage by doing nothing, not by doing something. But nevertheless, there is room for argument that Dinei Nezikin is the basis of Chiyuv Shomrim. The same, in my opinion, would be the proper formulation to say that Dinei Shomrim are based on the rationale of his chayvus, but that doesn't mean that a shomer directly obligates himself for a certain level of compensation. He does not have to be booking in the halachas to be liable for losses in the category of his shmira, whether it's shomer chinam or shomer sucha or soicha or shoyl. That would be my understanding. However, there's the Ramban in Bava Basra Kuf Sameches. Very interesting and for me difficult to understand. The Ramban asks, how could there be Dinei Shomrim and why wouldn't it be considered an asmachta and asmachta lokanya? The concept of asmachta is any obligation or kinyan which a person takes upon himself or performs without gemar das, without really having intent to take upon himself these responsibilities. So the Ramban asks, how could a shomer be chayev? A shomer usually relies on the hope that it wouldn't come to it, that the pekodin wouldn't be damaged or lost. Why wouldn't that be considered an asmachta? And the Ramban proves that when a person takes upon himself a monetary obligation, in the case this or that happens, even though it's beyond his control, it still would not be considered an asmachta. So this Ramban obviously proves, similar to the Tzos HaChoshen, that Chiyuv Shomrim is a direct result of his chayvus, and therefore the Ramban is troubled by the concept of asmachta. According to my understanding, Shomrim is Shomrim, and Chiyuv Shomrim is exercise akos of a din Torah, even though the basic rationale would be his chayvus. In Rashba V'Metziat Tzadik Dalad Amadalaf, we find a different approach. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning of today's Shir. The Rashba seems to indicate, brought in Shita Mekabetzes, that Chiyuv Shomer Chinam Lechud and Chiyuv Soicha V'Shoyel Lechud. Soicha and Shoyel are chayev because of the benefit they are entitled to. Shomer Chinam is chayev because a Shomer Chinam would be considered a mazik. According to the Rashba, Dinei Shomrim in its generality is a very loose concern or franchise. The common denominator between the various Dinei Shomrim is only in the practical aspect. They all took upon themselves to look after things that belong to others. They all took upon themselves some basic level of liability. Took upon themselves to compensate the other party if damages or loss is caused by their action or inaction. But together, the basic essence of the various Shomrim is different. Shoy Mechinim is Ki'ilu Mazik. Seicha V'Shoyel is similar to Loiva, Mekech Memka. They have to take upon themselves responsibility because this transaction is for their benefit. Shtoras Avodim V'Kekois, there are no Dinei Shomrim. That's Gzeres HaKosav Bov Metziah Nun Vav. However, the Rambam Perek Beis Halacha Gimel of Dinei Schiris writes that a Shoy Mechinim Posheas Chayiv even Shtoras Avodim V'Kekois. Mepnei She'Posheahu Mazik. The Ravid on the spot rejects the Rambam's opinion. Ramban of Metziah Nun Zayin also rejects the Rambam's logic, and the Ramban says it's only a groma ben azika. How do we understand the Rambam? Maybe at some other time we will discuss the concept of groma ben azika. And a tremendous chiddush that we find in Tshuvas Chasam Sofer Chosh Mishpat Kuf Mem and in Tshuvas Sheilas Yavetz from Rabbi Yanka Vemden, first Chelek Simen Pei Hey. They both argue Groma ben Azikin is a general rule. However, when partners or a shaliach causes loss, he bears responsibility beyond and above basic din and Azikin. So maybe one could argue that is the opinion of the Rambam. Shtoras Avodim HaKakois, there is no din of Shomrim, but after all, a person took upon himself to look after Shtar, Eved, Karka, Shel Chaveroi, and therefore he is Chayiv and Groma. No. I don't think the Rambam is a basis for the Chiddush of the Chasam Sofer. Too far and far-fetched. My understanding of the Rambam would be thus. The Rambam says, even though it's Gzeres HaKosav that there are no Dinei Shomrim and Shtoras Avodim V'Kekois, this Gzeres HaKosav doesn't refer to all Dinei Shomrim. And the most basic chiyuv of Shomrim, the most basic level of responsibility, of liability, which is Shoy Mechinim B'Pshia, that is not exempt. Regarding this chiyuv, there is a din Shomrim, even by Shtoras Avodim V'Kekois. That would be my approach and my understanding. So today we have dealt with one of the most profound and deep sugyas in Seder Nezikin, Parshas HaShavua, Dinei Shomrim. In this week's parsha, once again, V'yikach Sefer Bris V'yikra Ba'aznei Oam V'yoimru, and Bnei Yisrael said, Kol asher dibar Hashem na'asa v'nishma, higdimu na'asa v'nishma. Chazal say many things about that sublime moment, She'yisrael higdimu na'asa v'nishma. One of the Mamorim is in Shabbos Pei Zayin. B'shor shigdim Yisrael na'asa v'nishma yotzu bas kol v'amro, who revealed this secret to my children? This is the language of Malachei HaShoros, of angels from above. The Pasuk in Tehillim says, Baruch Hu Hashem, Malachov, Geborei Koyach, Oisei Devoroi, Leshmoa Bekol Devoroi. First Oisei Devoroi, and only then Leshmoa Bekol Devoroi. The angels in the heavens are Makdam Nasar and Ishmand. But Mamad Har Sinai, the Jews did the same. What is the essence of Higdimu Nasa Lenishma? What does it mean? My understanding would be this. Free men are never Makdam Nasa Lenishma. A free man feels entitled to inquire, what is it that you ask from me before I say yes or No. Anybody that was born free has the privilege to decide, do I want to give or not? Slaves don't have the privilege of free will. A slave fulfills his duties, and that's what's so terrible about slavery. Bnei Yisrael b'Mamad Har Sinai happily were mevater on their bchira chofshis. Yes, we were slaves, and we wished to be slaves. Avodim lemoker. As Antigonus Ishsoichei taught us in the first Perek of Masechet Avos, Havu ka'avodim hameshamshem asarav shalol manas lekavel plas. We are Avdei Hashem. We do not feel free. We were an actum nasal and ishma. And 2,000 years ago, Rava, one of the greatest Amaruim, was sitting and learning, and his fingers were bleeding, and he didn't even notice. And at Tzedok saw him, and he says, "Ama pezizu de kadmisu pumaychu leudnaychu adayin be psizu zaychu kaimisu." You are the people that were makdim nasal and ishma, and nothing has changed. You are still the same. And Rava says, yes, we are the same, and we are proud of that fact. Ananda sagina b'shlemusa es kayam bam tumas yeshorim tancheim. Atun de sagina b'akalkalusa es kayam bochem v'sedev bogdim yeshodem. Rashi says, Ananda sagina b'shlemusa hitalachnu imo b'tom lev kederach ha'oise me'ahava. It is out of love for a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Loving a Kodesh Baruch Hu and being beloved by Him, that we were Makdim Nasal and Ishma. And we happily gave away the Bechira that a Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us. The Posuk in Tehillim says, Tnu oz la Elokim, give strength to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the Gaon explains, how could a person possibly give strength to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Could we give anything to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He is omniscient and omnipotent, Kol Yochel v'Kol Yodeya. The Gaon has a very profound thought. HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictates everything that happens in the universe. Nothing happens by chance. Everything is predestined. Besides one area, and that is Maasei Ha'odom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave man free will, and he is free to do as he wishes, lios tzadik o rosh. So, in a way, that might be a chesaron kiviyochel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's power over the world. Our avodah is to give back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu the bechira He gave us. And essentially, that is Tnu Oz LeElokim. Rav Dessler, the great Mashgiach, in one of his marvelous essays, explains the concept of Nekudas HaBechira. There is a scale of bechira. We all have bechira and we all have nisyonis, but each of us in a different point on the scale. Talking for myself, I do not recall ever having a nisyon in Lo Tirtzach. I really never had Malchemes HaYetzer, not to murder a Jew. And I doubt any of the people listening to this year had a nisyon in Lo Tirtzach. Most of us had no nisyon in Shomer Yom Shabbos Lekadshoy, or in Macholas Asuros, or in many other Avedas. It is not that we don't have other nisyonis. Kol hagodol mechaveiro yitzro gadol mimeno. Inasmuch as we are human beings, we have nisyonis, we have a Yetzer Hara to deal with, but Each person has his Nisayan, his Bechira, on a different point on the scale of Bechira. Some kind of a Richter scale from 1 to 10, and each of us is at a different point. So our avodah is to push up the bar. Constantly push up the bar. Like the long jump or the high jump or any other feat. It is our duty to lift the bar from day to day, from year to year, giving back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu some of the Bechira that He entrusted us with. And that is the interpretation of the Goan in Tnu Oz Le'elokim. Rav Weiss Simcha explains in Or Sameach and Hilchos Shuvah that essentially, by nature, the angels have Bechira, because they have understanding. But they're in the heavens, and they see no Hester Ponim. They see Kvoid Hashem Be'idgalya. They see the Kisei HaKoved. They see Tzvo Malo. And therefore, they have no Bechira. Because being so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and witnessing His majesty and His greatness, how could they have Bechira? And that was the Madrega of Klal Yisrael. She'amdu ragleim har Sinai v'ikdimu na'aseh le'nishma. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Mi gila razel abonai loshon shemalach ha'shos mishtamshim bo. That is the essence of our avodah in this world. Coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Giving back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu the Bechira with which He entrusted us. Tnu Oz Le'elokim. Coming closer to the Madrega of our forefathers. Kishe'amdu ragleim har Sinai v'hikdimu na'aseh le'nishma. So the Kotzker Rebbe used to say, Matan Torah was once in history, but Kabbalah Torah could be and should be. Every day. Every moment. B'chol yoim v'yoim yiu be'einechu kechadoshim. And it is in every day that we should be magdim na'aseh le'nishma. Le'italechem HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'tom lev kederech hu oisim me'ahavo. We should always be zeicher to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yavo v'yero b'tchilo rechimo, and we should be zeicher to Yeshua Seilomim and be as goyel tzedek b'mheru v'yomeinu amen.